Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you so much, Thomas and Barbara and everyone who invited me and helped to set this up. This is really fantastic. So, as Thomas said, I'm an artist, but I also do, in the context of work and having worked since the beginning with forensic architecture at Goldsmiths College. It's an agency that does human rights investigations, that I call myself something like a private ear, so like a private investigator, but specifically for sounds. And what's very interesting about the role of sound in the relationship to crimes and crime scenes is that it's extremely common, because crimes are designed to happen out of sight often, but sound is much more hard to isolate. So there's usually a portion of the event that leak out and is heard beyond the frame of what is visibly possible to see. And that's why in almost every of the high-profile cases that you can think of the last 8 years, for example, the killing of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Oscar Pistorius, Amanda Knox, all those trials, those huge trials, all at some point hinge on a certain sound. And sound is extremely important for that. So, on the one hand, it's very much a part of the legal process, but on the other hand, there's no real way to speak about those sounds. And those sounds which have actually critical kind of importance somehow evade language. And so I've been really interested in trying to find ways in which you can articulate what those sounds mean and how witnesses describe sounds. And the project I'm going to speak about today is called the Earwitness Inventory. And it began in 2013 when I was on a residency in Stockholm. And I went, and at that time it was the height of a lot of, the return of a lot of claims coming out about the CIA rendition and torture program, which was basically, of course, hooding people, putting them on planes and taking them to secret prisons. And often, once they were in the prisons, no one of those people knew where they were. So vital parts of understanding where they were came through what they heard, because they didn't really see anything. They didn't know in which country were they. Later they realized they were in Thailand or in Bucharest or in wherever they ended up being, wherever the black sites were. And that was coming out at a time, those ear witness testimonies were coming out at a time when I was in Sweden, and I had visited the Swedish Radio Theatre. And the Swedish Radio Theatre is really amazing, because it's a room which everything, even the functional devices like the staircase that divide the mezzanine from the floor, and the floor surfaces themselves are all put to work to be able to create almost every sonic space and sound imaginable. So different carpets on the ground, different tiles, little box that means that a sound sounds like it's further in the distance. So all these devices were there in order to produce the illusion of sounds for radio theater, of course, to create sound effects. But what I was there thinking about at the time with this idea of the black sites was that what if you could actually mobilize such techniques to actually solicit acoustic memories of ear witnesses. So actually, paradoxically, rather than using it only as a space of illusion, you know, to make a can sound like a bomb, for example, that's the kind of illusion I'm talking about with sound effects. Rather than to do that, why not actually think about, paradoxically, bringing forth a kind of truth of an event? And so I actually began to design with the Swedish Radio a project that would use the testimony of survivors of the CIA rendition program and to try and identify things in their memory that they'd heard. And then in 2014, a year later, the US Senate released a report about the black sites, a huge thousands of page document, which actually listed every black site and confirmed the location of what some of those ear witnesses said. And so at that point, the project was shelved, because then why bother those people again who'd already been through so much when the information had been released? So the project kind of disappeared. Then in 2016, another project emerged, and I hadn't thought about this since, but I was asked to work with forensic architecture for Amnesty International to investigate a prison in Syria called Saydnaya. And Saydnaya is a kind of place where people were brought to, blindfolded. They were kept in the same room for the majority of their sentence. And although they knew where the prison was, it was totally isolated from independent observers, so no one could go there and see the conditions, except those prisoners who were taken there. And the prisoners themselves were never allowed to leave their cell. So everything of the violations that they spoke of the torture and of the crimes that were committed there, had been experienced through sounds leaking into their cells. And so again, it was this question of how can we create, and what I was tasked to do was to create dedicated ear witness interviews, to interview those people who'd been inside, those survivors who'd been released unexpectedly, to try and derive as much as we could about what was happening inside the prison, and to build a body of evidence based on the little that they heard, and the little that they saw, the glimpses that they saw, because every time they were moved through the prison, they had to cover their eyes. That's when I started to use in those interviews sound effects, but I would use the Warner Brothers and BBC sound effects. Those were the sound effect libraries I had available to me. And that was just one of, say, 3 methods I would use in those interviews to try and give some precision to what we were speaking about, because sound, of course, lacks a good vocabulary. It's very difficult to speak about sound. Sound borrows from other adjectives. Things are bright sounding, they're sharp sounding, they're everything but relating to sound. And so it actually means that you constantly lose precision when you're talking about it. And for something where you're trying to build a kind of case or trying to understand something so precisely in a detail-oriented manner, it's very important to get things right. So what was necessary was to kind of constitute a language, was to create one. And so one of the things I used to do that was the sound effects. Other things were tones and tones, like that you hear in a hearing test, and also encouraging the kind of like mouthing of sounds, all to sort of substitute the fact that we didn't really have words to speak about those things. So I'd play a sound, I'd say, did it sound like this? Knowing that it was very dramatic, very theatrical sounding thing, but at least allowing us to start from a certain position from which we could sort of start to say, no, it didn't sound like that, it sounded more like this. And so I left those 6 days interviewing those people, having played those sound effects and having at some point them being very successful and at some point them totally failing, thinking that I actually myself, if I'm going to be a really proper private ear, I need to actually amass my own sound effects library. A sound effects library that is not dedicated to the creating of sound effect for film, but actually for soliciting ear witness testimony. And so I began researching ear witness testimony from across the globe, scouring trial transcripts to see if the things that occurred to me through making the Saydnaya investigation were also present in lives outside the prison, in lives lived outside the prison. So actually, I'm not going to talk about the prison as a thing today. That exists. That's everywhere. What I'm going to talk about is this series of objects that are part of my sound effects library that are actually collected for the idea of future investigations, so not that investigation. And if you want to know more about the Prison Project, that's all available online from an Amnesty website. If you type amnestysaidnaya.org, you will see the work I did there. But this talk is in this context is about the ways in which those interviews changed the fundamental ways in which I thought about acoustic memory, and the way sound, which are often thought to be ephemeral, become actually deeply etched into our cortex if we kind of listen to them in the right way. And so what you're going to hear in this talk is the selection of objects. There are 95 in total. And what you're going to hear is that while some pertain to specific forensic reenactment of crimes in order to understand the kind of sonic constitution of an event, others in the collection pertain to something that is much less easy to speak about, memories that are much less processed, let's say. And you arrive at something between a kind of scientific reenactment and also almost hallucinogenic way in which lived events become tethered to and embedded in the objects that we are surrounded by. So I'm going to move through this list of objects alphabetically, and I'm going to then elaborate on a small selection of them in the form of independent and transhistorical vignettes that together represent the collection as a whole. And this collection stands for a language that we do not yet speak, a language of and between objects. So here are the 95 objects that I've collected from witness testimony all over the world. It begins with an aluminium stepladder, army boots, bag of sand, bag of soil, bananas, blackberry curve, 2011, brogues, cannelloni pasta, cauliflower, car door instrument, celery, cigarette lighter, cinder block, coins, cornstarch, cotton clothing, cricket bat, crocs, cuckoo call, whistle, cucumbers, curlew and peewit call, Dell keyboard 2006, dove and pigeon call, eggs, empty cans, family-sized soft drink bottles, fiberglass sledgehammers, flip-flops, frog guiros, galvanized dustbin, goalkeeper gloves, granite stone tiles, green coconut, ice cream truck music box, inflatable pool, iPhone 5C, iron building bar, junior punching bed, khubz Arabic bread, khubz dried fried, latex balloons with leather belt with metal buckle, leather handbag, marble stone tiles, megaphone 60 watts, metal door instrument with fold-out scissor slide feature, metal vat, mosquito killer lamp 30 watts, nightingale call, Nokia RM908 cell phone, ostrich feather duster, parabolic dish, pine cones, plastic bags, popcorn maker, popcorn seeds, porcelain Arabic coffee cups, portobello, potato crisps, chips, rug, Russian roulette balloon gun, sesame seeds, silver foil helium balloon, slingshots, sneakers, steel wool, stilettos, sunflower seeds, tissue box, tomato, Toyota Land Cruiser car horn, train whistle, tray rack, trays, unwound videotapes, ventilation duct cover, wagon wheel, water supply piping, watermelon, wicker carpet beater, willow cane, wooden steps, half carpeted, wooden door instrument, wooden planks, woolen mattress topper, yard chain, yellow pages, aluminium stepladder, army boots, bag of sand, bag of soil, bananas, blackberry curve, 2011, brogues, cannelloni pasta, cauliflower, car door instrument, celery, cigarette lighter, cinder block, coins, cornstarch, cotton clothing, cricket bat, crocs, cuckoo call, whistle, cucumbers, curlew and peewit call, Dell keyboard 2006, aluminium stepladder. The metallic staircase leading to the guards' room in the central atrium of Saidnaya prison became one of the ways in which we could try to approximate in which area of the prison former detainees had been held. The witnesses I interviewed never saw this staircase, but they heard the metallic resonant tongue of the guards ascending or descending the steps countless times throughout the course of the day. It was during my interview with Salam that it first occurred to me that I could try to use this sound as a way to locate his cell, and therefore determine from what perspective and proximity he could have heard other sounds in the prison. In the middle of the interview, I flipped open the laptop and typed metal stairs into a search engine for the Warner Brothers and BBC sound effects libraries. There was 245 entries. I quickly scanned the list. Footstep, metal stairs, cross-country ski boot, leather, no ski, right step. Low resonant metal stair. A body falling down a flight of metal stairs. Metal stairs, women's high heel shoes, fast steps. And then it jumped out at me. Footsteps, metal, male, sneakers, upstairs. I booted up the file and played it for Salam. Salam tilted his head, paused, and then said it was too forceful and too loud, but that the essence of the metallic impact was similar. I lowered the volume and added reverb to soften it, making it appear more distant. He seemed a little more satisfied. We both put on headphones, and I asked him to imagine that he was in the cell facing the door, and I told him I was going to move the sound from the left to the right, and he should signal to me when the position he remembered it coming from was correct. He closed his eyes. I looped the sound and slowly panned it across the stereo field. Increments before it reached the furthest right position of the pan control, he raised his hand to stop me. The needle of this sonic compass was pointing northwest. Iron building bar, junior punching bed, khubz Arabic bread, khubz dried fried, latex balloons with leather belt with metal buckle, leather handbag, marble stone tiles, megaphone 60 watts, metal door instrument with fold-out scissor slide feature. Coins. Dear Dr. French, I have a question to you as a case I'm currently working with has to do with the killing of an unarmed Palestinian protester, Bassam Abu Rahmi, who was hit in the chest by a tear gas canister. The Israeli Defense Force have claimed that the canister was not fired directly at Bassam, but rather that it ricocheted off the separation fence and was redirected towards him. I can't hear any ricochet sound in the videos, but what kind of sound should I be listening for? I will not be able to get the equipment to stage a reenactment for this for obvious reasons, though some preliminary research has shown that the sound of ricochets in movies are made by firing a coin in a slingshot. Thanks a great deal for your help with this, Lawrence. Wooden door instrument, wooden planks, woolen mattress topper, yard chain, yellow pages, aluminium stepladder, army boots, bag of sand, bag of soil, bananas, blackberry curve, 2011, brogues, cannelloni pasta, cauliflower, car door instrument, celery, cigarette lighter, cinder block, coins, cornstarch, cotton clothing, cricket bat. Crocs, cuckoo call, whistle. The trial of the athlete Oscar Pistorius was dedicated to discovering if he had intended to shoot Reeva Steenkamp through the bathroom wall, or if, as Pistorius claimed, he had in fact believed that he was shooting at an armed intruder behind the bathroom door. Ear witnesses living in neighboring compounds said they heard voices shouting and arguing before hearing gunfire. Pistorius testified that after he realized that it was Steenkamp that he had shot by accident, he screamed in panic and grabbed a cricket bat to smash through the locked door. During the cross-examination of the ear witnesses, a replica of this bathroom door was brought into the courtroom, and a forensic audio expert, armed with a cricket bat, began to beat it many times. This clamor was made to demonstrate that a cricket bat striking a wooden door could produce a deafening sound as intense as the blast of a gunshot. The cricket bat blast punctuated a line of questioning that sought to place a seed of doubt in the ears of the witnesses. Had they heard Steenkamp's shout followed by gunfire, or Pistorius' scream followed by the sound of a cricket bat striking a door? The demonstration turned the courtroom into a makeshift sound effects studio and the expert witness into a Foley artist or sound effects artist. Though his performance was billed as a forensic reenactment, what it actually achieved was a demonstration of the deceitful and illusory nature of sound, where clearly distinct and conventionally unassociated objects like guns and cricket bats become interchangeable and indistinguishable. Crocs, cuckoo call, whistle, cucumbers, curlew and peewick call, Dell keyboard 2006, dove and pigeon call, eggs, empty cans, family-sized soft drink bottles, fiberglass sledgehammers, flip-flops, frog guiros, galvanized dustbins, green coconuts. The sound effects in wildlife documentaries are extremely over the top. The loud slurp of a polar bear licking its paw has always removed me from the Arctic Circle and brought me to imagine some human in a dim, echoless basement recording studio, surrounded by peculiar objects which they endlessly flick, flail, brush, strike, and squeeze into microphones. I rarely ever wonder, paradoxically, about the labor of the sound effects artists in pure fiction like Game of Thrones. If you admit in the art world you watch Game of Thrones, it's career suicide, but I think right now it's okay. I only learned quite lately that in the show, Game of Thrones, they use green coconuts to create the sounds of all of their decapitations. As many of us have never heard a real decapitation, I think that green coconuts sound more like human heads to us than human heads actually do. Meaning that if we were to hear a human head instead of a green coconut, we may not be so convinced. Whereas we know that the scaly skin of an iguana squirming up a rock would not sound like it was wearing a pair of leather sweatpants. There was, however, one scene in Game of Thrones in which the sound effects did shatter my suspension of disbelief. It was not the rattling growl of a dragon or the stomps of a giant ice zombie which brought me hurtling back down to earth, but rather the very simple gesture of one character closing a door behind him. As I heard this door shut, I had an acoustic flashback. I had heard that exact sound somewhere before. It was in fact the same stock door closing track I had played to Jamal from the Warner Brothers sound library during the investigation into Saidnaya prison some 3 months earlier. This was enough, the sound of the door closing was enough to completely uncouple the sound from the images in the TV show and transport me back to the moment in the interview. Lawrence, is this the sound of the door? Plays door sound. Jamal, no, it was more metallic sound. Maybe if we watch a film where a prison door gets closed, you'd know which sound I'm talking about. Lawrence, what about this one? Plays door sound option 2, the one later heard in Game of Thrones. Jamal, it's close, but not quite right. I know where we can find the exact sound. After I got released from Saidnaya, I became a refugee in Turkey and was looking for an apartment in Istanbul. I visited an apartment located on the top floor of a building, and the apartment had a metal door so that burglars wouldn't break in. That metal door made the exact same sound as the one I was telling you about from Saidnaya. As soon as the door opened, I instantly told the guy, I cannot live in this apartment. It made the exact same sound. If we had time today, I would take you there so you could hear the cell doors of Saidnaya. Chishtak, pasta, cauliflower, car door instrument, celery, cigarette lighter, cinder block, coins, cornstarch, cotton clothing, cricket bat, crocs, cuckoo call, whistle, cucumbers, curlew and peewit call, Dell keyboard 2006, dove and pigeon call, eggs, ice cream truck music box. On January 12, 2005, Fabian Bengtsson, a Swedish electronics executive, was kidnapped and kept in a narrow wooden case for 17 days before he was released. Bengtsson never saw his kidnappers or the place in which he was held, but the sound of the assailant's voice leaked through the walls of the wooden box, along with other acoustic signifiers. Most importantly for the subsequent police investigation, Bengtsson had memorized what time the jingling song of an ice cream truck passed by the apartment every day, on the street outside every morning. This information was key in enabling investigators to find the apartment where he had been held, and so locate and convict the kidnappers. The story, which was widely circulated at the time by Swedish news agencies, caught the ears of Anders Eriksson, a forensic phonetician at the University of Gothenburg, and his student Lisa Oman. They realized that although countless experimental studies had been conducted into the veracity of eyewitness testimony, there was very little research in relation to the memories of ear witnesses. This motivated them to conduct a major study into the reliability of auditory memories. They tested 949 people's ability to blindly identify human voices. Yet their decision to focus only on human voice meant that to this day there was still no major study of ear witness memories of non-voice-based acoustic stimuli. Cauliflower, car door instrument, celery, cigarette lighter, cinder block, coins, cornstarch, cotton clothing, cricket bat, crocs, cuckoo call, whistle, cucumbers, curlew and peewit call, Dell keyboard 2006, dove and pigeon call, eggs, empty cans, family-sized soft drink bottles, fiberglass sledgehammers, flip-flops, frog guiros, galvanized dustbin, khibz, Arabic bread. While we were attempting to reconstruct the sound of the door in Samer's wing in Saidnaya, I began playing him filmic sound effects of metal doors. But none of the door sounds I played satisfied Samer's acoustic memory, and he kept telling me to raise the volume. The sounds were getting louder and louder until finally I played him a sound of a huge metal door slamming with the reverb set to Notre Dame Cathedral. That is to say, a vast cavernous space with a 35-meter-high ceiling, as opposed to the 4-meter-high ceiling of the actual space in question. Upon hearing this, Samar was taken aback. He stopped me and he said, "This sound was present inside Naya. This was the exact sound, not of the door, but of the sound of sheets of bread being dropped to the ground outside my cell. From the weight of the sound, I could tell if it was 5, 8, 10, or 20 sheets. Sometimes after the interview, I conducted a test, dropping packs of Arabic bread to the ground, which confirmed to me that which is written into the laws of physics. That is, that even 20 sheets of bread landing on the ground could not make such a vast sound. However, it was not the laws of physics that were at work here. Samar's complete conviction that this was the exact sound of food arriving made me understand that we were not talking about the intensity of sound, but inadvertently the intensity of hunger. Though this did not get me closer to understanding the architecture of the prison, it offered me a rare glimpse into the way that starvation distorts the senses. This is the replay. Endlosschleife, that means loop. Okay. Thank you. Khibz, dried, fried. Lawrence, which sound from the prison do you remember hearing the most? Anas, I remember most the constant sound of diggers digging. It stuck with me because I don't know exactly what they were digging. Graves? Lawrence, diggers, like a JCB digger truck digging into the ground? Anas, yes, it's the sound I remember most. All you hear is diggers digging. You feel like they're working on something, but you're unable to figure out what it is. Lawrence, well, what did it sound like exactly? Anas, like people were breaking dried out bread. Although we never had any bread to eat anyway, we were starved. So it sounded like someone constantly breaking dried bread? Anas, yes, that's what I remember hearing all the time. Metal door instrument with fold-out scissor slide feature. There exists many historical cases of the sound of doors being embedded as part of the torture process. Basques tortured by the Spanish describe el cerrojo as one of the most terrifying and damaging acts. That is the rapid, repeated bolting and unbolting of the door in order to keep them in a constant state of anticipation of torture. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's account of the Soviet Gulag describes how in Russia guards were trained to slam the door in as jarring way as possible or to close it in equally unnerving silence. The doors inside Naya prison had a similar effect on its survivors. However, Diab explained to me, the sound of the doors was not only used to spread fear. Salam and others used it like a sonar or an echolocation device that helped him and his fellow detainees locate the position of the guards. Salam's comprehensive account of the sound of the cell doors allowed us to approximate how many cells were in his wing and was one of the many details that made it possible for Amnesty to estimate how many prisoners were being incarcerated at that time in the prison. This is the extract from that part of the interview. Salam, every cell door, and there were 10 cells in our wing, had a unique sound. And what we would do is memorize those sounds to know which cell door was being opened. I memorized them in sequence first. So, for example, the guards would open the first cell door and we'd say, that is the sound of door number 1. Then we'd memorize the way the next door sounded different to the first door, and so on and so on. After some time, we would know the distinct sound of each door. So if the guards would open a door randomly, we'd know, for example, it is door number 3 because of a particular squeak of the hinges or the tack sound it would release from the lock. Some doors make harsh sounds, others softer sounds. Some have specifically rusted locks, you know. Each door had its own characteristic. The guards would try to use the door sounds to make you think there is more than one of them patrolling the corridor. He did not want to give us the impression that he is alone, and so, as each door had 3 different locks, he would open 2 locks at once simultaneously to make it seem like 2 different cells are being opened by 2 different guards. He would always think that he would succeed in deceiving us, but we were onto him. bread, khibiz, dried, fried, latex balloons with leather belt with metal buckle, leather handbag, marble stone tiles, megaphone 60 watts, metal door instrument with fold-out scissor slide feature, metal vat, mosquito killer lamp 30 watts, nightingale call, Nokia popcorn maker. Cell phone, ostrich feather. At 9:30 on August 13, 2013, a guest at a Florida resort was falling asleep after a long day at Walt Disney World. Potato crisps, chips, rug. As she was drifting off, she was disturbed by what sounded like popcorn. These were the early warning sounds that an hour later the resort would collapse into a 100-foot wide sinkhole. Toyota Land Cruiser car horn, train whistle, tray rack, trays, unwound videotapes, Russian roulette balloon gun. Water supply piping, watermelon. In an internet cafe in Kassel, Germany in April 6, 2006, Halit Yozgat was shot dead by neo-Nazis armed with a suppressed CZ-83 concealed in a plastic bag. There were no eyewitnesses to the murder. However, all the customers in the cafe heard some loud percussive sounds. One witness said, "I heard 3 sounds. 3 times it went tack, 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 one after the other, as if somebody was knocking on the walls of the room." Another witness described the sound was very loud, as if something had fallen to the ground. The closest witness to the incident said, "I heard something like a balloon exploding." Only one of the witnesses who was present claimed that they didn't hear any exceptional noises, and that was Andreas Temmer, an intelligence agent who did not disclose his presence to the police at the time of his murder until he was later identified by his login data on one of the cafe's computers. This sparked suspicions of a possible collusion between the agent and the neo-Nazis. The case began to resemble that of Sherlock Holmes's A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, in which not one of the ear witnesses to a horse race robbery remember hearing the guard dog bark. This led Holmes to investigate whether the thief was someone the dog knew. For is it possible one could fail to hear a balloon popping from 10 meters away? Could Temme's own keystrokes on a 2006 model Dell keyboard really have been so loud as to drown out the sound of a gunshot? Is Temme the dog that didn't bark? Wagon wheel, water supply piping, watermelon, wicker carpet beater, willow cane, wooden steps, half carpeted, wooden door instrument, wooden planks, woolen mattress topper, yard chain, sesame seeds. Aluminium stepladder. Such absences and ellipses in testimony can be just as meaningful as the things which are present, as Sherlock Holmes makes us understand. During the interview process with survivors of Saidnaya, I too devoted much of my time to trying to hear the absence of sound. I was looking for different ways to measure the state of enforced silence because I believed that the silence itself in which they were held was a human rights violation in itself. Not as it functions in isolation cells in the US as an act of torture based on sensory deprivation, but one more closely related to the stress position, defined as forcing the human body to adopt and remain for great periods of time in static squat positions or equivalent, in which the whole body's weight is borne by just 1 or 2 muscles. Likewise, the order of complete silence is used at Saidnaya to restrict prisoners' physical movements and to suppress their respiratory functions, forcing them to remain still, not to cough or clear their throats, not to stretch or exercise their muscles for fear of not making any sound at all. Attempting to explain to me the silence at Saidnaya, Jamal said one of the loudest sounds was the killing of lice, whose amplitude, he said, was equivalent to that of crushing a sesame seed between your thumb and forefinger. Stilettos, sunflower seeds, tissue box, tomato, train whistle. In confirming the location of CIA black site in central Bucharest, the ear witness testimony of a former detainee was vital due to the fact that he had heard the constant and omnidirectional sound of rail traffic bleeding through the walls. There is in Bucharest a V-shaped conglomerate of network rail interchanges, and at the nadir of this V-shape stood a warehouse, the perfect place for covert operations, as even though it was in the middle of Bucharest, it was completely isolated from the city by the surrounding layers of railway infrastructure. The release in December 2014 of the US Senate report finally acknowledged the existence of CIA black sites and confirmed that this warehouse was indeed being used as a secret prison as part of the US rendition and torture program. Tiles, green coconut, ice cream truck, music box, inflatable pool, tray rack. And this is an excerpt from Alistair Cook's account of the shooting of Bobby Kennedy. It was about 18 minutes after midnight. A few of us strolled over the swinging doors that gave onto the pantry. They had no glass peepholes, but we'd soon hear the pleasant bustle of him coming through, as the waiters and the colored chef in his high hat and a busboy or two waited to see him. There was suddenly a banging repetition of a sound that I do not know how to describe. Not at all like gunshots, more like somebody dropping a rack of trays. Sesame seeds, silver foil helium balloon, slingshots, sneakers, steel wool, stilettos, wagon wheel. An excerpt from Rosalind Morris, The Miner's Ear. Train whistle, tray rack, trays. On August the 3rd, 1964, the home of the Huisens, an Afrikaner family living in a gold mine village in South Africa, disappeared into an enormous subsidence as they and their domestic servant vanished in a cloud of flame and red dust. Soon after, 3 other houses fell into the pit, though their residents managed to escape. Those who escaped the collapse of their own houses were able to do so because they interpreted the sound of earth falling as a warning sign and not as a mere symptom. A deafening swoosh or roar some of those survivors had likened to the sound of a wagon wheel on a dirt road. But it had been a long time since any wagon wheels had rumbled across this landscape. That sound has a history too, and forms part of the remembered experience of the Great Trek, when white settler colonialists, their forebears, originally from the Flemish lowlands, traveled inland from the Cape in search of a new Jerusalem. Leather handbag, marble stone tiles, megaphone 60 watts, metal door instrument with fold-out scissor slide feature, metal vat, mosquito killer lamp 30 watts, nightingale call, Nokia RM908. Wooden door instrument. The front door slammed shut, and then there were no more voices, just the dogs. This is what Robert Heidstra says he heard as he walked his own dogs in a Brentwood alley the night of June 12, 1994. Almost all of the ear witness testimony in the trial of O.J. Simpson made remarks about hearing this door slam. The sequence of events in this case were crucial, and so each relied on a number of ways to pin this closing door sound to other events that punctuate their memories. The flossing of teeth, the time on a car's clock, the time printed on a restaurant receipt. Woolen mattress topper. Many of the weapons used in the prison of Saidnaya were never seen by victims, they were only heard and felt. When they heard others being beaten, they would listen to the sound and try to derive from it what kind of instruments were being used. During the interviews, the witnesses and I would try to describe and think of ways to recreate these sounds with the hope of making a comprehensive account of all the different weapons being used there. Jamal compared one weapon sound to the strike of an iron bar landing on the top of a wooden table, and another, he said, made a sound like a leather belt against a plaster wall. Sama's descriptions involve striking a specifically woolen, not foam mattress, while also explaining that if they hit the bottom of the detainee's feet, it made a sound like hitting a plastic bag filled with cotton clothing. At times, their instructions required the combination of 2 usually unassociated objects, like when Diab said I should hit a leather handbag with a willow stick. Other descriptions were drawn from more familiar memories, like when Anas described a specific weapon as making the sound as when people beat the dust out of their rugs out on the balconies in Damascus using wicker carpet beaters. These objects were the materials that they thought were best suited to mimic the sounds of the real weapons, with the implicit understanding that if we had the actual weapons themselves, we would get a more precise reproduction. However, when Jamal and Salam came to describe the sound of the water supply pipe hitting someone, they explained that getting the exact weapon and recreating its strike would be inadequate to achieve the sound they remembered it making. It doesn't sound like someone hitting a body, Jamal explains. it sounds like someone is demolishing a wall. And then Salam corroborates in a totally different interview. They weren't together. He said, you can't just get a plastic pipe and hit someone. To recreate that sound, you have to get a sledgehammer and smash it against a wall. Then you'll get the exact sound we heard when they used that weapon. Inflatable pool, iPhone 5C, iron building bar, junior punching bed, khubz Arabic bread, khubz dried fried, latex balloons with leather belt with metal buckle, leather handbag, marble stone tiles, megaphone 60 watts, metal door instrument with fold-out scissor slide. Yellow pages. In the process of accumulating my own sound effects library specific to the investigation of ear witness testimony, I've come across many descriptions in which ear witnesses explain the sounds they heard in the negative. It didn't sound like a punch, or not at all like gunshots, or it doesn't sound like something hitting a body. These witnesses know what it was they heard. They do not say, I did not hear a punch, but that the punch they heard didn't sound like a punch. Meaning that it didn't sound like the way they expected a punch to make, and that expectation is often conditioned by the sounds they've heard on TV or at the cinema. Currently, one of the most popular punch sound effects for the screen is created by dropping a phone book to the ground. And for many of us whose primary experience of violence is cinematic, this particular punch sound has become what we imagine and expect a real punch to sound like. Yet witnesses to real assaults suggest that punches sound quite different. It didn't sound like a punch, but a lighter being thrown to the ground and popping, said a witness in an Oregon courthouse. While another witness to the same punch said it sounded like the noise of a cinder block falling on concrete. A New Zealand witness said of a blow he overheard that it sounded like an egg cracking, and a witness in Hastings described an assault as like a watermelon smashing. These are but a few examples I have encountered where witnesses first negate the sound they expected to hear, only to then describe the real sound in terms of alternate or imaginary sound effects of their own devising. And sometimes it's repeated to the extent where, for example, in the egg case, he says egg about 6 times, to the point where you start to understand that the egg is inseparable from this punch that he heard. Somehow it became kind of encoded at the same time as hearing the sound. And our experience and memories of acoustic violence is completely convolved with the production of sound effects. This is what I've come to understand through this project. To the extent that watermelons, eggs, cinder blocks, leather handbags, a rack of trays, a cigarette lighter are not only objects that describe an event, they are themselves devices by which memories are encoded, stored, recalled, and even they can be retrieved. Arabic bread, khubz dried. Metal door. Popcorn seed, porcelain Arabic coffee cups, portobello, potato crisps, chips, rug, Russian roulette balloon gun, car door. Kibbles dried, fried. Mosquito killer lamp, 30 watts. Nightingale call. Nokia RM908 cell phone. Ostrich feather duster. Parabolic dish. Pine cones. Plastic bags. Popcorn maker. Popcorn seeds. Porcelain Arabic coffee cups. Portobello. Potato crisps. Chips. Rug. Russian roulette balloon gun. Sesame seeds. Silver foil helium balloon. Slingshots. Sneakers. Steel wool. Stilettos. Sunflower seeds. Tissue box. Tomato. Toyota Land Cruiser car horn. Train whistle. Thank you.